And now, an audiovisual presentation, presented by Squad Entertainment Inc.
Hello, and welcome back to the Unskripted podcast. This is the show that I do in between actual Unscripteds because I can't get them out every week. So I know that actually this is supposed to be an unscripted week, but just due to recently getting a puppy and traveling and a bunch of things in life, I wasn't able to get an unscripted out. So there will be one coming in another 2 weeks, which means there'll be a podcast next Thursday and then the actual unscripted. Um, but yeah, I thank you guys for understanding, and let's just hop into this week's event. Anyway, this week I'll be talking about Big Nate and why he doesn't have a live action movie. So, Big Nate is a comic strip that began in 1991, created by Lincoln Pierce, which was later turned into a book series after the success of Darren Wimpy Kid, with the first release of Big Nate in a class by himself, also known as Big Nate, the Boy with the Biggest Head, which was also written by Lincoln Pierce, which came out in 2010. Um, and it's very similar to the style of Darren Wimpy Kid, but it has its differences, and it kind of stays true to the original comics. Um, but that series has run for years, both the comics and the books, and Big Nate's just been around for a long time. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of characters and lore and stories that have been told over the years. Um, but in the lore of Big Nate, we follow Nate Wright, who is in sixth grade, and his friends Francis, Teddy, Arthur, Jenny, his single dad Marty, his sister Ellen, and Miss Godfrey, one of his teachers, amongst many other characters. Um, in 2010, a Diary of a Wimpy Kid style book was written by the author of Big Nate, called Big Nate in a Class by Himself. Um, and this book was one that I remember reading a lot as a kid, at least in my little private school that I went to at the time. We would pass this book around. Like, I mean, we all talked about this. And it wasn't until pretty recently where I discovered, like, not everyone knows this book. Not everyone knows this series. Um, because it was this and Diary of a Wimpy Kid that were, like, the big ones when I was a child and, like, where I was. And it just kind of shocked me that, like, Jack had never heard of Big Nate. Um, and I've been wondering recently because I was been moving things around and I saw my original copy of Big Nate in a class by himself. And I was just wondering what happened to Big Nate. So I looked it up, and he's getting a TV series on Nickelodeon sometime in the future. It's going to be an animated TV series, and it's supposedly going to be probably more like the comic strips, where it's just isolated little journeys. Um, and I was wondering why they chose to do a TV show instead of a movie, because I mean, all these young adult novels in the vein of Diary of a Wimpy Kid have kind of started to get movies. They had Diary of a Wimpy Kid. They did the second Diary of a Wimpy Kid like reboot, like the eighth book or whatever. They've done Middle School, The Worst Years of My Life. I mean, like all these Artemis Fowl, they're all starting to get it, and I was just a bit confused on why Big Nate hasn't gotten that treatment. Um, and I think part of the reason might be because Diary of a Wimpy Kid Dog Days bombed in 2012, and that was probably at the time they're looking at making this a movie. It was the book series of Big Nate was just still starting off, and when Diary of a Wimpy Kid bombed, it probably kind of killed any talks there might have been. But I can't confirm that there even were ever talks of making a movie. Um, but I can also think of maybe this didn't get turned into a movie due to the comic strip format leading itself better to TV. As I've kind of talked about, it can lead to more isolated adventures. Um, but I've decided to write my pitch for Big Nate the movie, and I I'm basing most of my story off of Big Nate in the Class by Himself, the first book in the series. Um, but that doesn't mean it is page for page the book. I've taken some creative liberties and kind of made it my own to some extent. So I hope you guys enjoy This is uh, Kyle writes Big Nate the movie, I guess. So the movie begins with Nate waking up and realizing he's late for school, which means he doesn't have time for breakfast. Um, it kind of shows that Nate is kind of a bit of a slacker and a bit unprepared for his daily activities. Because Nate in the comics is typically, um, I wouldn't call him a cool kid, but he sees himself as a cool kid. He's very arrogant. He's a lot of a slacker. And the only class he really cares about is like art. He kind of likes doodling and drawing comics and stuff. So um, that's kind of Nate in a nutshell. So Nate is late for school. He doesn't have time for breakfast, and he grabs a fortune cookie as he rushes onto the bus. And on the fortune cookie, in the little like fortune, it says you will surpass all others today. Um, which leads to Nate daydreaming on the bus about like a crown being placed on his head as Jenny, his sixth grade crush, like kisses him on the cheek, and Miss Godfrey, the teacher who he hates and considers his arch nemesis, is taken away by police and is arrested, and then a dog kind of jumps up like into his arms because apparently in the comics, which full disclosure, I've never read any of the comic strips. Apparently, he really wants to get a dog and never has been able to. So that's kind of his daydream sequence. When suddenly he's awakened by like Nate, and it turns out it's Gina, his other arch nemesis, uh, who's repeating his name until he kind of like focuses on her. And then Gina mocks Nate for believing a fortune cookie. As Nate's friend Francis gets onto the bus, he kind of shuts her out. He doesn't really care about what she has to say, and he just starts telling Francis um, or Francis actually tells Nate that their band got booked to play the school dance. Well, the school couldn't actually book them, so they're going to play outside. But in their eyes, it is just as good of a win, and hopefully, Enter the Mollusk, I believe, is the band name. Um, will finally have their breakout amongst their peers. So they get to school and they meet up with Teddy and Arthur, the other members of their band, before first period begins. Um, and during as they walk into first period, um, Nate calls Miss Godfrey a name, and she asks him to stay after class to give him a detention. So as everyone else leaves the class at the end of the hour, Nate sticks around to get his attention, and so now he's walking alone in an empty hallway because everyone else has already kind of made it to their class. Um, and while he's walking, he sees one of Arthur, who is Jenny's current boyfriend. So he's always had this little bit of a rivalry with Arthur. Um, he sees Arthur's art in the little display case, and he tries taking it out before being caught by a teacher and getting a second detention. Um, and all of this chaos causes him to be late to his second period class, which gives him a third detention. Um, but in this class, he is writing Jenny, his crush, a love poem before Gina steals it and reads it aloud. Um, he calls her a jerk, which gets him a fourth detention. Um, and I know this might seem a bit harsh and unrealistic, but again, I am kind of pulling from this book, and I mean, most of these detention slips even come from the book, um, and you're going to see why this is all important in a little bit. But anyway, after second period gets out, the three, Francis, Teddy, and Nate, are walking down the hallway together, and Francis and Teddy tell Nate that if they can't practice tonight, um, they will sound really bad at the dance. Um, but Nate obviously can't because he now has four detentions. Um, so they decide they're going to practice during lunch, and then lunch rolls around, and they start practicing their band at their table before the principal stops them. And Nate's very afraid that he's going to get a fifth detention out of this. But the principal just asks him to stop with a warning, and so they apologize, and he walks away. But before the principal can walk away entirely, Nate throws a green bean at Arthur, and then claims that it was Arthur's fault that they got yelled at. Although it's clearly just a front for him being jealous that Arthur is dating Jenny. Um, so this results in a massive food fight amongst the lunchroom, and the principal comes back in and asks who was responsible for starting it, and everyone points to Nate, who then gets a fifth detention. Um, and then this leads into a montage of Nate living out some other parts of his day, which include being overshadowed by Arthur in Jenny's eyes, getting a detention for asking or for making fun of the gym teacher, um, getting another detention for letting a frog loose in the science room, getting another detention for falling asleep in math class, and continuing his poem for Jenny, and then getting another detention for cheating on his French test. So the bell rings, and Teddy, Francis, Nate, and Arthur are talking about how Nate has 9 detentions. And Nate says that the school can only make him serve 1 hour a day by law, so he can still get to the dance, which starts at 7. But it does mean he has 9 days of detention ahead of him. So the group splits off. Francis, Teddy, and Arthur going to practice in Francis's yard for their big night, and Nate going to serve his first of 9 detentions. And as Nate walks to detention, he realizes that the fortune cookie he got earlier didn't come true, kind of like Gina said it wouldn't. And then he walks into the detention room, and Miss Sarawicki, who's like the detention monitor in the books and in the comics, tells Nate that she has never seen anyone with more than 3 detentions, which makes Nate realize that he did achieve something, or he did surpass others today, just not in the way he was expecting to. So his fortune did come true, and it makes him really excited. And the credits roll, and along the side of the credits, you see Nate performing with his band at the dance, which is actually probably just like an actual song playing over them lip syncing, for the sake of it being credits. But my thought is that at least Nate, Francis, Teddy, and Arthur, and probably Jenny as well, should all be kind of unknowns. You know, they're sixth graders, so you don't want to have some huge star taking out of the fact that they're in middle school. So if you can find at least one who can sing, then maybe you could put him singing in the credits instead. I don't really have a huge stake in like whether it's actually Nate singing or not. But as the credits come to an end, we fade back in on Nate and Arthur after their performance in the dance, and Nate apologizes to Arthur for being a bit of a jerk to him, and he tells him that it's all because he likes Jenny, and Arthur goes to shake Nate's hand and wishes him luck on his quest to get a girlfriend, I guess. And this makes Nate just as angry because Arthur is so seemingly perfect. So yeah, that's kind of my thought on Big Nate as a movie. I think this would work for a couple different reasons. A, the Diary of a Kid movies worked fantastically, and the big difference between those and this is at least the first Diary of a Kid movie takes place over the span of a whole school year, whereas the Big Nate book, at least the first one, I can't remember the other ones on top of my head, but I know this one takes place over the span of a single day, so it allows you to be more creative with how this character kind of acts, and it's a bit more. It allows you to be a bit more interesting and a bit more high stakes. And even though at the end of the day it is kind of just Nate gets 9 detentions, the movie, it is still an interesting way to see how you can like look at the other side of any bad situation, and how you can almost fulfill your own destiny. And that is kind of the story of Big Nate. And I also think that this could possibly, I don't know if this would be long enough to be like an actual theatrical release. I don't know if you have enough content just out of the book, unless you combine two, which gets very messy very quick. Um, I think this would almost work better as a Nickelodeon television movie, like an hour, maybe an hour and a half with commercials. I don't know. But like, you could do a live action one right before the premiere of the Big Nate show, or I don't know how far that show is in development. I don't know if it's feasible to even have that done. But Nickelodeon, if you want to reach out and want me to write a full-fledged screenplay for you, please contact me. That would be amazing. And I think this could work as a film. I truly think that Big Nate deserves a shot on the big screen, or at least a live action shot on the little screen, because I think Big Nate. I love the Big Nate books. I'm sure the comics are just as funny, and I would love to see this be translated into a live action film. Anyways, thanks for watching. We have new content here every day. We have gaming videos every day at 11:30 Central Time, and unscripted podcasts and unscripted episodes on Thursdays at 1 o'clock Central Time. We also have free comics at Access Comics on Twitter and Instagram, and at Access Comics Official on DeviantArt. We write superhero stories. They come out once a month, and they're free, so you might as well go and check them out. But if you have any video games or movies or TV shows you'd like us to cover on this channel, whether it be play, review, or whatever, leave them down in the comments below, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. And also subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.